as you just heard, this meeting is going to be recorded. If you have any problems with this or feel uncomfortable, just turn off your camera, change your name, and we'll be good to go. Yeah, so a little introduction too with you in mind. Some of you who have already attended some of the events may already know what's going on, but it is a mental health initiative that Y4Y is running. It's been a series of 4 workshops followed by this panel on mental health related topics. So the aim of this whole initiative is to help build youth resiliency with mental health. So it's been several different topics that have been explored, from self-care to cultural considerations to substance use. And tonight's panel is going to be a conversation between mental health professionals and youth. Oh, there's some feedback. And youth. So it's going to be very interesting. To start us off, I'll just give a little brief agenda for tonight. So we're going to start with an introduction from all of the panelists. We have 5 of them here with us tonight. Then we're going to move on to what's going to proceed to be the rest of the session, which is a conversation period. So it's going to be 1 question from the attendees, 1 question from the panel, back and forth, kind of like a dialogue. I have already some questions that youth have submitted prior to coming to the panel. My chat box, direct message, or just the main chat box is open if you want to submit questions and would rather me ask them for you. That's totally fine as well. But you're more than encouraged to come on screen and ask questions yourself. The attendees have also developed a number of really interesting questions for the attendees. And they will be posing them. And as they ask the questions, I encourage youth to come up and give their responses, give their perspectives. You don't have to know much about the topic. It can be secondhand experience, firsthand. We just want to hear what you have to say. Yeah, so one important thing with having Zoom conversations, as we're all pretty familiar with at this point, is making sure that you stay muted when we are not speaking. And I'm going to ask that tonight we all use the raise hand function, just because there is a number of us here, and it can get very confusing when a lot of people are talking at the same time. So I will ask that we all use the raise hand function, and I will call on people to respond to questions and to ask questions. This goes for both the panelists and the attendees. Okay, so I'm going to get into a little bit of Zoom etiquette. We're all pretty familiar with this at this point, unfortunately. So respect, I mean, these are sensitive topics we're going to be discussing tonight, sensitive questions. So I want to make sure that everyone is being respectful of others' opinions and considering the language that they use and the perspectives that they bring forward. Chat mute functions, we already went over this, super important. Just stay muted if you're not speaking, and if you would like to speak, raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yeah, and use the Zoom chat if you have questions as well that you don't want to come on screen to say. I'm happy to say them for you. And if you want to remain anonymous with your questions, direct me. I'm happy to ask them on your behalf. Rename. So if you are okay, if you're comfortable with being recorded, I ask that you guys name yourselves as your name. It can just be your first name if you feel more comfortable with that. And if you can have your camera on, that would be appreciated, just because it's more engaging. But again, it's all up to your comfort levels. Okay, so that's kind of that starts us off. So I'm gonna pass it on to the panelists now, who are all going to introduce themselves for us. They're going to have a few moments to talk a little bit about their backgrounds, their professions, why they're here tonight, and it's going to be great. Okay, I'll pass it on to the first one on my list. So Patrick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick. I work for Portage Youth Program, which is a therapeutic community. It's a 6-month program internal and 18 months program aftercare follow-up. I have a degree in addiction. I've been in the field for the last 24 years. As a counselor to start, and after as managing different programs, especially in the Portage organization. And my interest for mental health addiction came from my own struggle with addiction 27 years ago, which I overcome. And after that, I got in the field and work since in the field. So that's a little bit of my background.
Thank you so much for sharing, Patrick. Yamin, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Yamin. My pronouns are he, she, they, whatever. I am also a addictions mental health counselor at a place called Dunham House, which is in Dunham, Quebec. It's also a 6-month treatment facility, but it's for adults. I'm the full-time clinician there, where I do individual counseling, group sessions, relapse prevention, crisis intervention, intakes, discharges, whatever is really needed. And I'm coming not as a counselor from Dunham House, but all as a volunteer for AMI-Québec and Chabad Lifeline, which I've been volunteering for a number of years, speaking in schools and on conferences like these. So that's where I'm coming from. I have a degree in social work that didn't teach me much, period. But I did learn more about social locations, intersectionality, marginalized communities. So I didn't learn much about counseling in my degree, but I did learn a little bit about what it's like not to be white and all the other things that privileges offer. And yeah, I'm very passionate about recovery from anything. I do have experience of pretty serious addiction in my own life. I've lost a number of people. I've had my own struggles with substances. So there's an inherent drive for me to be there for others the way others were there for me. And yeah, I decided to be on the panel because I had a tough time as a kid, and the people I work with had a tough time as a kid, and the people that I work with have kids themselves. And so I feel like this is a crucial demographic, just like any other for mental health. I'm a big believer in community building and learning from each other's experiences and being there for each other. So I'm very, very honored to be here, and thanks everybody for being here with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Yamin. Oliver, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Oliver. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Young Carers Project Coordinator at AMI-Québec. So AMI-Québec helps families manage the effects of mental illness. And in the Young Carers Project, I'm working to build services and awareness of young people who help a loved one with mental illness, a disability, or other needs. I studied public health and social policy at the University of Victoria, but I'm a believer in local action and acting on things that you're personally affected by. So I started in health to help my partner advocate for better access to medical devices for amputees and disabled people. I've done work with my old high school and others to create a safer environment for queer youth. And that's really why I'm here today too. I'm here because I am a youth. Mental health is really important to me, and I'm glad that everyone feels the same way.
Thank you for sharing, Oliver. Nadia, could you go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nadia. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I think you can see them on my Zoom here. Yeah, it's a nice feature. Thank you so much, Maria, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. So I currently wear different hats. I always have trouble announcing my profession because I do many different things. So the first is that I'm self-employed as a mental health consultant in workshop development, facilitation, and education. My other hat is I'm a writer and editor and operate a small business called The Writer's Block that I started in 2017. And I'm also a musician and composer. And last year I decided to go back to school and take the plunge and study music production and sound engineering, which was a pretty wild 6 months. So music for me is my sole driver. It's a major vehicle for me to process emotions. I've lived a lot of trauma, and music has been there as the thing that has pushed me to keep on fighting. So in terms of academic and professional background, I'm a wee bit multidisciplinary. I have an undergrad in psychology from McGill and a master's in public policy from Concordia. And I would say I'd spent most of my career in and out of the healthcare, mental health spaces in the nonprofit sector, in the private sector, and in the public sector. So I've been really, really privileged and fortunate to get this, 360-degree view of how to navigate, what we call Quebec public health and frontline services. And also not only as a practitioner and in clinical roles, and as a student in child psychiatry back in the day at McGill, but also as somebody with lived experience who has to, had to navigate those systems as a taxpayer and as somebody who, paid out of pocket when they could. So I started working at the community mental health level for a wonderful organization called Revivre about 2 years ago in 2018. And that's when I sort of had this like aha transformative moment, because they're a fabulous organization. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of them, but they have a very unique self-management approach to managing anxiety and depression. So they trained me in this modality. And then I had the privilege to lead the first ever anxiety self-management support group in English to the Anglophone communities. So, which brings me to one of the reasons why I'm here. I mean, I believe we're all underserved in Quebec, and we could do this way better. And I think, I'm angry about what I see. I think the government is failing us. I think the private sector is unaffordable for most, and the waiting lists are very long. So for me, this is very frustrating in tandem to see the amount of anguish amongst youth, the substance issues right now for everyone, domestic violence. There's a lot of indicators showing that we're not doing very well collectively. So I think there's a very big gap. And the third reason I'm here is, obviously to hear from you directly, what are you struggling with? What are the challenges, that you're going through? Because I think that when we design programs and frontline services, we rarely ask the end user or the consumer, right? Or the client, what they need. So I'm in the process of developing my own workshops, my own modalities. So I'm also interested in hearing your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nadia. And last but not least, Alexie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexie. I use she, her pronouns. So I'm a project manager in mental health promotion and prevention at CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association, the Montreal branch. So more concretely, my role is mental health education. I give conferences to the general public, including school boards and teachers and nonprofits, private sector employers. I also do consulting work for outside organizations, and I develop content for media campaigns and article writing, that sort of thing. So I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from McGill and a master's in public health, specifically in health promotion from the University of Montreal. So I work kind of in between the French and the English world. And my experience is also, like Nadia, quite varied. I have a lot of experience in research. I've helped conduct research on issues like infectious disease and stigma, mental health during the pandemic, social class and dementia, as well as public participation in health research, which is very important. And I also have experience in scientific communication, and I've worked in other nonprofit on issues of social inclusion. And so I've always been really passionate about mental health. I have been involved in campus mental health initiatives since I was younger, and I used to advocate and speak about my experiences with burnout and social anxiety, as well as eating disorders. And so, I was in your shoes, or some of your shoes, at one point in my life, and I've experienced aspects of the mental health system. I've lost close friends in my earlier 20s. So now I'm in a position where I want to hear and I want to, contribute to changing the system that we currently have. And that's why I oriented myself towards public health. So yeah, thank you for having me. I look forward to hearing from all of you and from, my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Alexie. Thanks everyone for introducing themselves. As we've heard, we have a group of very diverse, interesting backgrounds and professions. So I think it should be a very rich discussion tonight. So we'll go ahead and start. I will pass the microphone to the attendees first if there's any questions that anyone already has to ask. If not, I have some that have been submitted to me that I can ask. So I'll give a few seconds for anyone to raise their hands. Okay, I'll start us off. So this is a question to any of the panelists. In your own fields of work, what have you noticed to be the biggest obstacle that youth run into when accessing mental health services? Anyone can chime in. You just raise your hand and I'll just, yeah, go ahead, Nadia.
So at Revivre, so we had a sort of a sliding scale for our self-management workshops, right? Anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and so on. So one of the issues was that a lot of people, like, it wasn't, I shouldn't say it was sliding scale. It was like we had bursaries and, like, you know, discounts if you want for people in certain situations, but there was only a finite number. And the going price was still, you know, was $420 over 10 weeks, you know, back in the day. So a lot of people, I think, couldn't afford that. So, and if you look at it from that perspective, affordability, I think that's a big roadblock. So then, you know, forget about private sector, seeing a psychologist at $150 an hour. We can imagine how inaccessible that is as well. So, and I would also say a lack of awareness, because we did have free services, we did have a lot of things, but there was no promotion being done. The English community didn't know that we existed because it was operating in the French space for 30 years, doing incredible things with more of the Francophone speaking communities, but the Anglophones didn't know we existed. All they knew is AMI-Québec. Bless you guys. But yeah, you guys would take the, you know, take the heat. So that was my general experience.
Thank you for sharing, Nadia. Does any other panelists have, go ahead, Catherine.
No, I have a question actually that I want to ask afterwards. So please, panelists, jump in. Different topic, different question. Okay,
Patrick, I'll have you speak next.
Yeah, I agree with Nadia. On our side, I can say that for addiction, lack of knowledge is a big struggle to have access to services, and especially now that school is remote, because most of the time there was professionals that were guiding youth with different issues to different programs or different resource. And right now, because the specialists are not there or the guidance is not there, so people feel helpless and feel that they don't really know where to go and they don't have the guidance that they usually have. So for me, that's the main thing lately.
I'll go next. I agree with everybody that Quebec does a terrible job at letting people know what services are being paid for with taxpayer money. People don't know that they can get a social worker at their CLSC, and the social worker can help them find resources. There's very basic stuff. Even people in the mental health world don't even know what the mental health services are, myself included. I'm sure there are programs out there that would help a lot of people that I'm unaware of, and a lot of money seems to be put into this healthcare sector without us knowing, and yet not enough money seems to be put into the healthcare sector anyways. In my experience speaking in schools, which is not just about addiction, but mental health in general, the trend that I find in terms of obstacles is that kids don't always feel like there are people to turn to, or if there are people to turn to, like a guidance counselor, a family, or a friend, they don't have that sense of trust or confidence in the relationship. So those are two major issues, that sometimes there isn't somebody where they feel, where I'm going in as a stranger and they'll disclose information to me. And unfortunately, I don't have that sense of continuity. I can't go back and follow up with them. I always invite them to reach out to AMI-Québec or to find me another way, but that rarely happens. And a lot of the time there's a guidance counselor in the school or somebody like of that nature. But for various reasons, they don't feel like they could open up to those people. Sometimes they breach the confidentiality because they're underage. Sometimes they don't get the vibe and they don't feel like talking to those people. So I feel that the lack of people to turn to, whether they're there or not, or whether they feel comfortable to turn to those people that are there, seems to be a major obstacle.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yamin, for sharing. Oliver, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of resonating with what everyone's saying. I think as a young person who has tried to access care in the past and currently, I mean, that cost obstacle is huge. And I think it's even worse when you know that you're signing up to be put on a wait list. I think it's even harder to make that plan and to know that, 3 months from now, am I going to remember what this was about? Or is there going to be new stuff? Am I going to see the same person again? It's really hard to make that commitment and put down that money when you don't have a lot of faith in what you're going to get out of it. And it's pretty valid to feel that way. And same thing with the kind of not knowing where to turn. I mean, I think that there's such a burden on a lot of these small organizations like AMI-Québec, where the staff, we spend our time partially finding out about the other services. And we need more of that coordination, more kind of leadership to be doing that, because it does lower our capacity to actually just deliver services. We shouldn't have to be doing so much homework.
I also
Thank
want
you,
to,
Oliver. Yeah. Go ahead, Yamin.
I really wanted to say that I think that different people's social locations aren't represented for, obviously Nadia brought up low income, but I'm thinking gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, religion, a physical ability. I think those are major obstacles as well that prevent kids from reaching out to services or getting the services. Even if they're there, they may not be properly supporting the needs of kids in those ways. So I want to say that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Yamin. Thank you. Nadia?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Yamin's point really resonated. That was sort of one of my issues. I'm half Greek, half Middle Eastern background. So being part of an ethnic minority from my mom's side and a visible minority from my dad's, I also felt that the programming that I have seen and that in organizations that I've worked with is not necessarily taking the cross-cultural sensitivity piece into consideration. And I think that's really unfortunate, because Montreal, and even the surrounding areas, like we're pretty damn multicultural and good for us. So I feel like there's this gap between our espoused rhetoric of inclusion and what the programming often actually ends up delivering. It's my 2 cents.
Thank you. And Alexie, this will be the last comment for this question.
Sure, perfect. Yeah, I think it's a bit like reductionist to present it this way, but when I picture issues of access, basically it's an issue of, supply and demand. There's an incredibly high demand, and there's a lack of supply, and then you add issues like wait times and shortage of professionals. But then the added layer to that is that you're not sure that the supply that you will get is culturally appropriate, is accessible, or can meet, the needs or the style of therapy that you want. And I have colleagues who work at Black mental health collectives, and which is an English speaking, community organization for the Black community of Montreal. And it is incredibly difficult to find accessible and culturally sensitive therapists or even social workers, nurses. There are issues on the supply side of things. And not to say that we can't act on the demand, but that is to me like a huge problem. Not just, increasing the number of professionals, but making sure that we increase it in the right way.
Thank you so much, Alexie. Kathleen, your question will be the next for the attendees. I'm just going to pass the mic to the panelists to ask their question. So any panelists can raise their hand if they'd like the chance to ask their question now. Oh, sorry, Alexie, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see the hand.
I just kind of kept it up, but I can go again. And I would like to know maybe what you have experienced, not, in detail, share what you're comfortable sharing, but what are the obstacles that you face, whether that's, looking for something as specific as therapy or just talking to someone in your environment, whether that's school or volunteering or workplace. Where is that barrier for you?
Kathleen.
I'm just gonna jump in here, I think, because you guys all spoke on obstacles that I think resonate with all of us in different ways. Like, I've been on waiting lists before for like 9 months. And sometimes, like, depending on where you're at personally with your own mental health, like, it can be really crucial, and there are no like emergency services. And then when you're partnered with somebody, that connection isn't there. And over the past 9 months, you've been, trying to deal with some of your own issues. And then, you do your research and you do your readings and you don't get a good fit with your therapist or counselor or whatever, or they don't like really hear what you're saying, or they're not familiar with the kind of issue that you're trying to overcome, or they don't have specialized issues. And then that cost just reinforces that pressure on yourself that you are, left to deal with things by yourself without having adequate support. So they're all just compounded. And then this is, I guess, just sympathy for people that are trying to help everyone else. Like, the healthcare system is already so short, and you guys just bear that burden of having to help even more people because you don't have colleagues. And I just wonder like how you support yourselves in this. So that's not necessarily a question you have to answer, but like, I think about that regularly when I speak to my therapist and then dump my life problems on them.
Thank you, Kathleen. And I like the question that you posed at the end. I will invite you back on to ask that question formally after this, because I do want to hear the panelists' perspective on that. Cecilia, would you like to give your perspective on this?
Yeah, so just to share my perspective in like the student community. So speaking with people from like Concordia mostly, it's always been an issue to actually access these services, because a lot of people pay into the insurances that are provided by the universities, but they don't actually have that many therapists. It's something like 5 therapists for I don't know how many thousands are in like the student bodies of these universities. So it's a constant complaint. And I've also realized like it's a constant issue that comes up with the student unions and them trying to get more funding for these programs and more like therapy services, but nothing really coming of it. And like from a youth perspective, I feel like we've had, like as youth, we kind of advocate probably a little bit more than say people from another generation, like some of us. So it's kind of trying to get our voice heard and like taken seriously with the administration when we're actually telling them, no, we actually need these services and we're not really getting them. So that's my 2-bit sentence on that.
Thank you, Cecilia, for sharing that. Does anyone else want to comment on this before we move on to the next question? Okay. Kathleen, did you want to bring back your question to the panel?
Sure, maybe I'll put it in a 2-part question, because my first question, just to kind of play off of the obstacles that you guys addressed, like we just talked about all these compounded dynamic problems, and I'm wondering, being at the heart of the healthcare system and everyone's talking about it collapsing with COVID and stuff, do you guys see any like promising solutions or advocacy that is taking place, or like actual movements that are happening at the governmental level to better support both the therapists and those working with people that have issues? And then the second part of that question is like, how do you guys take care of yourselves?
Thank you, Kathleen. Does any of the panelists want to start us off with their response? Yeah, go ahead, Oliver.
And it's pretty quick and it kind of answers both, but like I get constantly inspired by the people that I get to work with every day. And that is really just everything to me. I think good people do good things and support one another. And I have a lot of faith in the people that I've come into contact with. And I believe that they want to be as best informed as they can be, and they have personal experience and they want to make things better. And that's kind of what I look to. And I think that that's the most promising thing,
Thank you so much, Oliver, for sharing. That was quite the warm response. Do any of the other panelists want to comment on this? Yeah, Nadia, go ahead.
So I can't speak to the first point so much because I'm kind of out of the loop in terms of, what's the government doing or not doing. I mean, we're still waiting for our 12 to 16 sessions of CBT that Minister Varin was promised all of us. You know, we didn't get it. So it'd be nice if this government can go back on that. We won't hold our breath. I think there's a big movement though, however, for self-management and peer support. The Long-Term Ministry of Care of Ontario has implemented like peer support centers across the like southeastern part of Ontario. The rest of Canada has also followed suit. We're doing some peer support stuff here. There's a momentum, it's picking up, but it's slow. In terms of self-care, to answer that part, I need to work out like as much as possible because otherwise I have so much energy and yeah, it could, you know, things could go sideways. So I've learned to channel my energy over the years and to try to eat well, stay hydrated and avoid energy vampires, things and places that drain you.
Thank you, Nadia. That was some good suggestions. Yamin, would you like to share?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with my kind of bleak perspective on what I'm seeing. And I don't have details into the nitty-gritty workings of the government, but I believe that with patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy, we're not headed in the right direction in any way. So I have a kind of dire look towards the future. But that also allows me to focus more on the present with the people that I interact with on a daily basis. So kind of putting my blinders on and working with those around me, my loved ones and my community and the community through the institutions that I work with. I don't look so long-term and I kind of refocus my energy on what's around me and who I can actually influence with the rest of my life and the people around me. So kind of turning a blind eye to where I kind of feel like we're going allows me to reallocate that kind of concern and anxiety towards the people that seem to be appreciative of support today. And in terms of self-care, I believe how important it is to be able to talk and be heard about emotions. And so as somebody who tries to receive that kind of reaching out at my work, I try to have my own circles where I can vent and get emotional support. I have a peer support group that it's like a men's circle where we talk about issues related to masculinity, and that's like sacred to me. Every week I have a 3-hour session with very close loved ones, and so making sure that I'm able to go through my own emotional processing cycle, right? So I get stressed and I have to have places where I could let go of that stress, but I can take on more stress. And so that cyclical kind of approach to self-care is essential, because I work in a confidential industry. I can't go home and talk about like what's been going on at work. I have to keep everything very confidential. I work with almost everybody I work with has severe, chronic, and unresolved traumas from childhood, from adolescence, with partners, at work, like everything under the sun. I also work with people that have concurrent mental disorders. So while they're trying to work on their substance use issues, there's schizophrenia, bipolar, BPD, PTSD, sexual violence recovery. And so I need to be able to let go of that stuff. And so whether it's through music or working out, or like everybody was saying, those basic kind of common sense approaches, as well as having my own place to say my own feelings. I feel like I get paid to, whether the solace for me is that I feel like I get paid to be the best version of myself. Like in order for me to be the most compassionate, client-centered counselor, like I need to be clear with myself. I need to make sure that I'm as present for the people that I'm trying to support as possible. So that, like Oliver was saying, I get inspired by my line of work, and so that's been so far so good. I don't know about how long it can last, but so far it's working out pretty well.
Thank you, Yamin. Okay, we're going to move on from this question. So next, it's the panelists that get to ask a question. So raise your hand if you would like to voice your question next. Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I was very curious to know how and what you guys did to adapt to the new reality of the pandemic, and for most of the time, like social interaction being very low. And so how did you feel that you adapt to all that?
That's a great question. raise your hand if you'd like to share your thoughts on this.
So I just want to say that I saw Adrienne had their hand up. I don't know if like they wanted to speak, but if you did, maybe I'm sorry if we missed you.
Thanks, you didn't miss me. I'm sure Maria saw that maybe I have a question for the panelists at a later time, but thank you for noticing.
Yes, that is what I assumed, Adrian, that you had a question. So that will be, you will get the next question. Karen, go ahead.
Hi, so how have we been adapting? I'll speak for myself, not so well, you know. I think that there was quite a kind of, I don't even know how to say it. There was a disassociation with like reality and how fast and how, I mean, I think back before COVID, we didn't really have time. Anyway, I'll speak and I didn't really have time to kind of stop and take a look around and see how fast things were going. And then all of a sudden it was like a stop sign that just smashed you right in the face. And you had kind of no choice. But how do you cope with that? And how do you cope with all the different things you haven't been coping with all the time, all of the things that you're not maybe equipped? So yeah, not so good, like alcohol or you know, self-destructive types of behaviors. Then the loop, see, mental health is a fragile line, you know. It's everyone can potentially be you know, warped by it. Maybe that's not the right word, pardon if that came out. Like, it's definitely something that, you know, was on the line for many of us. And I think, if anything, to answer maybe Kathleen's question earlier, like what positives come out of it and stuff, I think one bloody good thing is that we're talking here tonight. We're having more and more opportunities to, you know, break down a little bit of these taboos and open up the dialogue. You know, and there's been funding and it's on the news, and here we are, you know, talking about how do we create resources. And this is amazing because we can't keep isolating these problems and keeping them under blankets. It's just, you know, not working pre-COVID. So yeah, I mean, it's one day at a time, and it's opening up and being vulnerable with people and sharing the real stuff. I'm really very inspired. So I want to thank you guys for being here to talk about this and just open up the conversations. It's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Karen. It's really appreciated. Samara, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. In terms of the pandemic, I think I was actually talking to my friend about this the other day, in terms of there's actually a reason why we don't remember anything from 2020. And I think it's because it was so traumatic for all of us. And we're gonna all have to deal with the trauma from that year separately, individually, in a whole bunch of multitude of ways. Because I think everyone has experienced a different pandemic in a certain way. And we're all going to have to deal with it in a different way too. But as much as it was a detrimental loss for everyone in so many scopes and forms, I feel it was also a year, and has been 2 years, of kind of an epiphany of sorts. For me and a lot of my friends, it's the first time that we've actually been able to sit down and kind of acknowledge our mental health for the first time in our lives, because we've had no other choice to do so. It was the first time we were sitting with our minds alone in so long, and we got to acknowledge it and learn from it, and, you know, attend panels like this, and sign up for therapy, go to a psychologist for the first time, just acknowledging these important things and taking our mental health first and foremost. So there's been pros and cons, but yeah, taking it day by day. People have been mentioning working out, self-care. For me, it's always kind of going back to a child's state of mind, I think is really important. You know, finding hobbies and going outside. And I don't want to say go outside and play, but honestly do that, because it really helps. Go for a walk, go see a friend. Nature is a really, really good healer, but we're taking it day by day. That's my answer.
Thank you for sharing. Keisha, would you like to go next? I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Seems you're still, oh, there, I think you're.
Can you hear me now? Yes, okay, So basically just with like how I've gone through this whole thing, I've always thought of myself as somebody who had like a pretty strong mental health. Like I was always, especially like at the beginning of the pandemic, I started like focusing more about on myself, and like self-care, self-improvement was like kind of all that I was focusing on. Working out, journaling, like meditation, like the whole shebang, I guess. And then as the pandemic progressed, I realized that like all the energy that I was like putting on myself, like at one point it was just too much. And then I realized that I was missing so much social interaction, and I didn't realize how much I needed that in my everyday life. And that's when I first reached out to a therapist. And basically all this to say that like my experience has been like pretty tough with experiencing loneliness and anxiety because of the pandemic. And I know my experiences haven't been good, and knowing me, I know that like already from the beginning, I was already starting at a really good point. So I just worry for my peers who already, even before the pandemic, were experiencing anxiety and depression, loneliness, even before we had all these barriers. Yeah, so I try to reach out to my friends to make sure that they're okay, and I try to do whatever I can to text and call, but it's not the same.
Thank you for sharing that. Jael, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So for me, how we cope. So I'm actually a Christian, so I come from a Christian church. And so I'm very used to community, and I'm used to being around people on a weekly basis. And we didn't get to have that for 2 years, or like we had it for a little while. Obviously it stopped. So that was really hard for us. And what I did notice in our church is that everyone was just kind of like our faith was getting a little tired, or we were, people stopped coming and like stopped showing up. So people were getting really, really discouraged. And so for, as a leader, I am a leader in my church. It's been harder for us to see that. So for coping, trying to help other people is hard when you're already like kind of suffering on the inside. So yeah, I'm just used to being around people, and that was really hard when the pandemic hit. But yeah, just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jael. Kathleen?
I feel like at the beginning of the pandemic, like this is not meant to sound like twisted at all, but like the pandemic was like the best at the first, like 2020 was literally like the best time I've ever had in Montreal. Like I could rollerblade through the streets. There were no cars. Like I'm used to being kind of insular and spend time with myself. And I don't think I realized how difficult it was for other people, because for me, it was a space that was really comforting. There was less noise. I could breathe better. There were more animals. It was really exciting. And it felt like the city became a completely different place. It was almost like traveling to a new place that I had never known before. So it was exciting in a different way. And then in 2021, like that changed really dramatically when I lost somebody that was important to me. And I think it hit me really quickly how other people might have been experiencing the pandemic of this undertone of like doom, and like, is my loved one going to die? Like, are my grandparents safe? Is my family safe? And I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective until it hit me personally. And so that's kind of like shifted a little bit my outlook on the pandemic. But at the onset of it, it was like fine until you're hit with something that's really devastating that wasn't really impacting you in the same way that it might have been impacting other people at the onset. So that definitely gave me a lot more empathy for other people that I had kind of been oblivious to. But I think it's, I'm still rollerblading when it's not snowy. And yeah, it's just kind of like a shifting process all the time, I guess, of trying to suss out what the pandemic and restrictions are going to give you from one day to another, from 1 week to another.
Thank you, Kathleen, for sharing that. I'll pass the mic back to the attendee. So Adrian, would you like to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. So I guess I would address this to the panelists who specialize in addiction, but but anyone who feels like they have a reaction to this question, regarding addiction, is it still the case that we find that many cases of addiction have their roots in childhood trauma or trauma in youth? Is that still, let's say, largely the case when you face addiction issues with people? And if so, what's being done well right now in 2022? Let's say, how has the culture shifted in a good way in terms of how we address childhood trauma or trauma in youth? Is it helpful that we're opening up the conversation, that more young people are aware that mental health is something they should be checking in with themselves about, that it's part of the common lexicon? What are some of the positive developments that we see in 2022 that we're doing differently as a culture to help young people, to help children especially? And where are the biggest gaps? What needs to be done in terms of helping people where addiction is rooted? Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That's a great question. Yamin, would you like to answer?
Sure. Well, I'll also refer to Patrick as the much more experienced person. So please take what I say with a grain of salt. This is just my very limited experience. It's anecdotal. I think that the answer is yes. I am seeing that a lot of substance use issues do come back to childhood. Whether we call it trauma or not doesn't really matter to me. What matters is that there's an association between unresolved issues and the way that they wind up manifest, not the word, like they wind up turning into issues with substances. It's rare in my experience that the substance issue itself is the deep-rooted part of it. There seems to be something there often that eventually winds up causing issues with substances. And Nadia, that's your name, yeah, Nadia brought up the CBT being offered by the ministry, and I love that idea. I have concerns about it. CBT is a directive, prescriptive type of therapy where people are essentially told what to do and how to fix their problems, and so it's not inherently a bad approach. My concern, well, I try to take over time as I cut my teeth clinically, I try to take as much of a clinical, client-centered approach and make sure that there's an established rapport between myself and anybody I'm trying to support before any kind of direction is given. So even within these, cutting edge ministry innovations to deliver more counseling, there's some red flags that pop up for me there as well. So absolutely. I try to take a very broad view of trauma. So my definition is from Dr. Gabor Mate, who's kind of like Big Daddy in the addictions world. And the definition that I think he gives is an experience that causes somebody to disconnect from themselves. And I like how vague it is because it doesn't have to be what we consider, something traumatic, like a plane crash or a serious accident or the loss of a loved one. Anything that causes anybody to disconnect from themselves, I like calling it trauma because I think there's enough seats at the trauma table for everybody. What winds up happening is someone says, well, if that's trauma, then, what about what I went through? People start to often realize that their own backgrounds and their own histories reflect a lot of these things that often require healing. In terms of the gaps you are asking for, I think that, as advocates for mental health and professionals and service deliverers, there's a lot of enthusiasm towards mental health conversations, new ways of looking at mental health, but culturally and in families, people that are parents, I don't know what kind of education, psychoeducation is getting to them. So kids will go to school and they'll get all this mental health initiative in them and they'll go home and, their families may not be either aware or supportive or considering, it may not be on their radar to prioritize mental health conversations. They may not have the competence to respond to mental health needs or emotional health needs. So I think that as much work as we try to do in schools and at that level, I don't see it as like a vacuum where, if we empower the kids to have those conversations and the rest will take care of itself. I think it's going to take all generations to have different views of mental health that validate how important emotional and mental health is, to validate how crucial emotional support is. So I'm going to stop talking because otherwise I'm not going to stop. So I'll just end there very abruptly, but thanks for your questions.
Thanks, Yamin. Can I just ask you a question? One more question. When you said the name of an author, and it made me remember that I think I read a book like 20 years ago called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Is that him? What a great book. Recommend. Thank you. You brought back a good memory. I should reread that book. You brought back a good memory. But thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Yamin. Patrick, would you like to respond as well?
Well, I'll try, because this is always a very, very tricky question. There's many ways you can look at it, because reality, what we have realized in the field for many years, first thing maybe to comfort you is that there's a definite awareness that's being improving through time. Because from when I started in the field to now, a lot more people are trauma informed, a lot more people know about it. I think we're at the beginning of it, because it's not much people are well educated or well equipped to deal with it properly and to guide people through it. And the tricky part about it that we have noticed, because in our approach, dealing in a therapeutic community with a group of youth at the same time all the time, is that trauma, you always have to take in consideration the fact that each person, well, you can take two persons that go through the same situation and the level of reaction they're going to have to it is totally different. For one person, it's going to be insignificant, and for the other one, it's going to become a trauma. So down the line, to me, it's more about how people start at least to open up about it with people that they trust, people that they feel that they're comfortable with, and then the beginning of the process. If you start the process and you start opening up about it, I've rarely seen people that have not been through different stage and different level and getting the support, because I think people are aware enough to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm not the right person to support you with that. Here's the right person. And it goes to the one to another one. So I feel that the awareness and the fact that you ask that kind of question and people are more and more intrigued by it and interested by it and open about it, I think it's the way to go about it. But definitely, to be very honest, there's still a long way to go to be able to solve that one, if one day we get to a point where we can solve it. But I think that the fact that people are more open about it and it's something that we can discuss now, it's going to open a lot of other ways. That's my take on it. Yeah.
Can I talk again, even though I said I wouldn't? The expectation that like a drug counselor or somebody in that field is going to have like a belief that childhood has anything to do with it is not given or a guarantee. There are still predominantly Gestalt theories about recovery where you got to focus on the now, and you know the past is in the past, like what can you do today? It's not guaranteed that people are going to vibe with attachment theory, trauma theory, mindfulness or compassionate based relationships with this issue alone. So even in the field of addiction, there's a lot of I see a lot of influence from 12-step recovery, which, you know, I have a very neutral stance on it, because there's definitely some things to critique about it, but it never claimed to be a therapy. Like it never claimed to be evidence-based, never claimed to be clinically proven. It's basically for, if you don't want to die, there's a people around your neighborhood that are supporting other people not dying if you want to do what we're doing. And in that, I have pretty significant experience in 12-step world. There's no mention of the past. There's only recognition that the past led us here and it was destructive and there were behaviors that are regrettable and there was destruction. There's never asking why. They never ask why did that happen? Like what caused this to be? And so I don't rule it out. I would recommend, if somebody can find their community in the 12-step world, absolutely. There's millions of people getting better around the world for almost 100 years now, and I wouldn't turn anybody away from it. I also think that in the evidence-based approaches that have been happening in the last 20, 30, 40 years, I believe in a compassionate, trauma-informed approach to counseling in general, substance use or not. That's not necessarily what people are going to be disseminating, you know, especially if they're not coming out of school recently, if they've been in the field. You know, I hear Patrick talking about it from what sounds like a trauma-informed perspective, but I wouldn't say that people that have been in the field for a number of years would automatically be updated on this more trauma-informed model.
Thank you so much for sharing, Yamin. So unfortunately, our hour is almost up. I would have loved to continue having this conversation, but maybe we'll have another opportunity soon. I want to thank all the panelists for being here tonight. As we heard, the mental health field is overwhelmed right now, and I can imagine you were all very busy and had to take time out of your days to come here. So thank you so much for having a conversation with us. To everyone who attended, thank you so much for coming tonight. I hope to see you at some of our upcoming events. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and answering questions and asking questions. I think it created a really interesting dialogue. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me for a second. Okay. So upcoming events. So we have our Cultural Considerations in Mental Health workshop coming up February 10th in about 2 weeks. It's again going to be virtual. It's going to be led by Tony Alfonso from AMI-Québec. It's going to be about broadly what kind of cultural considerations should we have when we're speaking about mental health, how might mental health change between cultures, what kind of sensitivities should be brought in when this topic is being discussed. So it's going to be really interesting. Again, it's going to be kind of a conversational format. So I encourage you all to come. Lastly, I just wanted to let you know that there's a youth pulse check survey that Y4Y is sharing on their platforms. It's aimed to develop a better understanding of what challenges young adults are facing today, and to build the resources to ensure that they're getting what they need. So I'm going to post the link right now in the chat. If you have a few moments to fill it out, that would be great. And in addition, for every survey that's submitted, $1 gets donated to the Kids Help Fund. So it's a great cause. Lastly, if you're not familiar already with Y4Y, if you don't follow us on social platforms, we have quite an active social presence. So give us a follow, stay updated on our upcoming initiatives, projects. And yeah, so again, thank you all for being here, and I hope to see you in a couple of weeks for our next event. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.